Você está ouvindo o podcast Estudar Direito pelo Mundo. Neste podcast você aprenderá com Klaus como você pode alcançar o sonho de realizar seu mestrado em Direito fora do Brasil. Envie suas perguntas e depoimentos no Instagram @klauslau.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to Estudar Direito pelo Mundo podcast in this special New Year's edition. Today, I'll be speaking with Julia Sanchez. She is from New York, and I'm super excited to learn about her journey. She is studying to become a lawyer sometime soon, going to law school in a couple of months, hopefully. And she had the chance to be a paralegal. She did her studies, her associates in paralegal studies, but I'll let her introduce herself so she will do a better job than I can. So once again, thank you so much, Julia, for joining us today. And would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I'm Julia Sanchez. I'm from New York. I am 24 years old, and I just graduated from Stony Brook University, which is a large public university, research university here in New York. And I'm hopefully off to law school in August. I'm doing, my LSAT preparation and getting all my applications out. So that is my journey. So I was an estates paralegal. I did a little bit of everything, but that's what I did for on and off for 3 years. And that really helped me get ready for this law school journey. And as far as my personal life, I love to sew and I love to cook. So that's what I'm doing when I'm not thinking about the future of the law.
Super cool. Yeah, thank you so much once again for joining me. I
No
had
problem.
the honor and privilege to meeting Julia at the summer course / pre-law course from Fordham University, which is also a university in New York. So we can get to speaking about being a paralegal, and maybe that changes from state to state, but in general terms, what do you need in order to become a paralegal?
So, in my firm, I was technically the only paralegal, because I had an associate's degree in paralegal studies. So there's no like license that you get, it's a degree. But all of the other paralegals in the firm were, even though they had, 40 years experience each, I was always the youngest in my firm. Everywhere that I worked, I was the youngest. But they technically were legal secretaries, and sometimes people will use that interchangeably, but it's not technically the same thing. So you can be trained to be a paralegal. You can start as like a secretary or a legal secretary, and then, you work your way up and you can start using that title. But they were technically legal secretaries, and I was technically a paralegal because I had the degree, but they knew so much more than I did. Everything that I learned about being a paralegal, I truly learned from the legal secretaries and the paralegals in my office. I learned a lot in school, but this was practical knowledge and they taught me everything. So you can go to school to be a paralegal, and then you would do an internship and you would, get trained at a job, or you can just start as a legal secretary, which doesn't take, much education, and then you would get trained at a job. So when I started, actually, I came out of paralegal school, but I started in my law firm kind of like as an intern. So I only did filing work for like 3 months because they were really testing me out to see, what I knew. I was like fresh out of school and everything. And I didn't know that much. So I did only filing work, and then I worked my way up to, more like interaction with clients and things like that, more secretary stuff. And then I eventually started doing paralegal work. So like summons and complaints. And then I got trained specifically in estate work, and I did pretty much only estate work. And I became an estates paralegal that way. So it's a combination of schooling and on-site training. It's really how you become, a paralegal.
That's perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. it's very interesting because here in Brazil mostly, or especially most of the firms, like not the big law ones at least, in the ones that we can find everywhere, it's not a common profession to see. So we don't really have like a paralegal um, idea here in Brazil. So it's always very interesting to understand what that comprises, because here mostly our lawyers do everything. They do all the work. So it's I do understand that it's quite different from what you have in the States. So
Yeah,
would you be able to tell us a little bit about like what a day-to-day life of a paralegal looks like?
sure. So, it's going to be different everywhere you go. And that I know plenty of attorneys who work completely alone. They do all of their own writing, they do all of that stuff. They do not have paralegals. So, it's not something that you need to be a successful attorney. And and it's a little bit different if you work in the public sector. I worked in the private sector. I also worked in a tiny local law firm. So my day would look really different from someone in big law or someone who works in like, let's say, like the DA's office or something. But the way people have asked me what is a paralegal, a lot of people don't even know what it is. And I tell them, like, the same way a doctor would have a nurse is the way a lawyer has a paralegal. So the way a nurse like might know medical intervention and know things like that, they can't practice medicine the way a doctor can. And a paralegal is the same thing. So I know a decent amount about the law, but I can't practice law. I assist my attorney in practicing law. So I did a lot of the like background stuff to make sure that he was ready to do his law practice. So like I said, I worked in a very small law firm. So I worked directly for my boss. And sometimes in big law, like, paralegals will work for other paralegals, and there'll be like a hierarchy of paralegals. I just worked directly for my boss. There was a senior paralegal in the office and I worked with her, but I would just get, my direction from my boss. But I was an estates paralegal in a small firm. So I worked 3 or 4 days a week because I was also a college student, or I still am technically. So I would go to work, and some days I would be drafting, estate documents, trust documents all day, and that was it. And then other days we would have the clients come in, which is always my favorite part of it. And we would have them, do like all of the signing, and we would do that. So we would go over all the documents and things like that. And that was always my favorite part because I wrote all of it. So to see, my work help somebody, that's my favorite part. So every day was a little bit different. There would be days where we also did some personal injury stuff at my firm. So I would just be speaking to insurance companies all day. Those aren't necessarily my favorite days, but it's all part of it. So it really depends, I think, on your practice area, the size of your firm, the private or public sector. But by and large, we had a fairly quiet firm. So there would be times where, my boss would come to me, and like I said, I was always the youngest at the firm, and he would say to me like, "Oh, what do you think about like running a Google ad, or what do you think about this, or what do you think?" So I wore a lot of hats. Like, he would come to me about like marketing things, or like, there were days where I only showed him how to reset his password, like that kind of thing. So every day is a little bit different. It truly depends on the size of the firm and the practice area, because there are people that work 9 to 5, 40 hours a week at huge firms, and their day is going to look nothing like mine. So, and this, when I was starting out, when I was 21, that was perfect for me. That small firm, lots of attention. I could, make little mistakes, and then I was like, oh, let me fix them. It wasn't like $100 million deal where everything was on the line all the time. It was kind of a more low stakes kind of firm. So yeah, that's how it was for me.
Oh, that's great. That's very interesting. And you mentioned about your education on paralegal studies. So I was actually wondering, and this is actually a question that somebody asked over Instagram. So were there also international students studying paralegal works, or are there any international paralegals that you know of?
Yeah. So actually one of my really good friends I met in school, and she was an attorney in Colombia, and she had met an American man, and they fell in love. They're married now. So she had come to America to live here, and she couldn't practice law here. So she wanted a way to, learn English and get more affiliated with American law. So she did the paralegal studies program at Suffolk. And that wasn't entirely uncommon. We did see different attorneys from around the world come, and then they would be paralegals and they would get trained as a paralegal here. And she did that, and she worked as a paralegal for a couple of years. She did mass torts, which is, like settlements and claims against corporations, things like that. And she did that as a paralegal. And then she ended up going to Fordham for her LLM, and now she's an attorney here in America. So a lot of people do that. Like when they come to America, they go and they become a paralegal first, and then they go on, like when their English is a little bit better and they have better understanding of American law firms, they go on to do an LLM. Yes, it's not unheard of. I have met a lot of people from other countries that did the paralegal studies program at my school. But as far as like, I don't know too many people that I met while I was working that came, I didn't have too much contact with international paralegals because of the nature of my law firm. But I'm sure at larger firms you would see that more. Yeah, there's definitely an opportunity for people that want to come here and study, paralegal studies. If they want to go on to do an LLM or not, there's definitely that opportunity, I think.
Well, that's incredible. So maybe that could be like a good opportunity as like an entry level idea of like getting to know the law, entry level, maybe like it wouldn't require as much of you like as an LLM
Yeah.
would.
So I think too, there are a lot of opportunities if you want to come here and be a paralegal in Manhattan, because there in Manhattan, I mean, I live like an hour and a half from Manhattan. I live out, in the farm country, but there's opportunities for everybody in Manhattan. Anybody who wants to come here and work as like an international paralegal, or you can go to a big city and find work. Absolutely. I do think that that's where I live out in the country, probably not. So you have to know like what your expectations are for that kind of thing. But that's, that goes without saying for any field. But I do think that it's not entirely hopeless if you want to come to America and be a paralegal. Yeah.
That's incredible. I really appreciate your time and
Yeah.
your willingness to join us, and speak a little bit about this field. It's very, very interesting for me to see how the law can branch out and embrace and encompass so many different things. Here in the podcast, the idea initially was to help people. It was just like a personal interest for me to ask people from several different countries, how does it work to become a lawyer in your country, so I got to find out that some countries need like a long internship, like a 2-year practice before you can become licensed after your bachelor's degree. So and some countries don't even have a bar exam. As soon as you have your bachelor's, you can file to become an attorney. Some countries will require an oral test, so it's so interesting. And then after that, I started kind of being more focused on how can Brazilians, to be exact, kind of go into some fields, so I had the chance to interview a couple of people about, very different aspects, and soon we are going to do an interview on legal English. And I feel like understanding the role of a paralegal is very important here, because we see several people who kind of took this line, and as you said, there's not like a right or wrong, it's an option as well, and each person can build, but it's always interesting to have the knowledge and to understand how kind of like the generals of how it works, right?
I tell anybody who tells me, oh, I want to be an attorney, I tell them, be a paralegal first. Be a paralegal first, because I think people have this idea of the law like what they see on television, and they think it's like very, very sexy kind of like suits and criminal, like you're gonna go and it's gonna be a smoking gun. It's not like that. Like my attorney was in the office with me 95% of the time. Court is not it. Like people think that they're going to go and be an attorney and it's going to be, they're going to make so much money. None of that is true. Like go and be a paralegal, work in a law firm, and watch what the attorneys do, and really think to yourself, is that something I want to do? Do I want to dedicate 3 years plus my summers and clerkships and internships or whatever, and do that? And I tell everybody the best way to know if you want to be an attorney is to be a paralegal. You have to do a lot of the writing, you have to do a lot of the communication, you have to do that stuff. And you don't get the idealized version of what an attorney does. You see the real version and you get to talk to the attorney. And I've asked every attorney I've ever met, if you could go back and do this all again, would you still be an attorney? And some say yes and some say no. But I get to ask them that question because I work with them. So I tell everybody that if you think you want to be a lawyer, try to be a paralegal first. And whether you do your bachelor's degree and you take a year off and you work as a paralegal, or you do, an associate's degree in paralegal studies and then you go back, it's the best way to know. Working in a law firm, whether you do an internship or you go as a paralegal, is the absolute best way to know if you want to be an attorney or not. Because you get to, kind of see their lives. But I do think that paralegals, they don't get the credit that they deserve. And I do think that anybody who's interested in the law should definitely start there. It's a great place to start.
That's incredible. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts in a couple of years after you start practice as an attorney as well.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Well,
Yeah.
Julia, once again, thank you so much for your time and willingness to join us. I really appreciate it. And maybe if you'd like to share any like last words of wisdom with those who are listening to us, please feel free. But really, thank you once again, and I hope you have a great new year.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem. Anytime. I'd be happy to talk to you again. Text me next year when I'm in law school and we'll talk about that stuff with the journey. But yeah, definitely keep in touch. This was fun.